Welcome. Welcome back, everyone. Sorry, this seems to be, again, the day of technical difficulties. And I'm just waiting for Mark to get back on. Alright, everyone, just waiting for Mark to get back. And thank you guys for retuning in all over again. So definitely happy to see Mark is back. The rest of the Siren Sundays are not as glitchy. Hello, Mark. Of course, sorry, in the vein of climate change, my phone overheated.
Oh, see, there you go.
So it's clearly a very hot day, but I was trying to be a good citizen and not use my AC all hours of the day, but it's on now. The room is cooler, and we can continue. And I feel like you may have still been going on when I connected. I don't know if you could backtrack on your thoughts a bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I cut off.
Culture, increasing your output as you decrease your input, and then
yeah. So, as biologists or as people familiar with life sciences, we understand that the cycles are important, and so and how each organism within the ecosystem interacts with one another, and so when I mentioned having the pond on the property to catch water, that sparked the thought of permaculture. So you have a situation where you're not wasting any of your inputs, quote unquote. So when you harvest, let's say your leafy greens, or you harvest your composting, right? Composting is something that's always spoken about. People say, save your kitchen scraps, put them in a bucket in your backyard, and break down. It works. In a farming system, a good farmer will incorporate the harvesting of whichever greens that aren't being used, and the browns, which are your dry paper-like material or non-living material, collecting that from your farm, making sure nothing is going to waste and being recycled. A part of that too are the animals. And so even if you are a person that may not be a meat eater, animals are still an important part of the ecosystem in a permaculture setting and on a farm setting. Having chickens around, they help with pest control. They assist with fertilizing because as they go through and they're picking at insects in the grass or through your crops, they're also scratching and pooping. And so they're effectively fertilizing and adding to and amending your soil as they go along. Goats are in the same way. Now you have to keep the goats away from the important crops. Goats will eat your thing, right? And then you'll have some curry mutton later, right? So goats are a good addition to a small permaculture operation. If you have small little lamb, rabbits, or also some another animal that contribute to that cycle of the permaculture garden. You can have ducks as well, geese, and things like that. So birds, we talked about lamb or goat. If you have the space, then yeah, you can have a cow. The point is that you're being aware of the cycles and the processes that will keep your farm going. In addition to that, you're not planting in a traditional row. So I think I had mentioned earlier, if you are a corn farmer, you would say, oh, I only need about 1.5 foot, square feet around each plant to grow my corn, and then you just have a row of thousands of corn. However, another farmer might look at that and see the stalk of that corn as a pole, and so I can grow pole beans on that, or string beans that will run up the corn, and it will not impact the viability of the corn, but you're taking advantage of the grow space and what nature has given you. That practice right there, that's something that's been going on for centuries. The Native Americans did it. They had essentially a planting system incorporating corn, beans, and tobacco, and they can grow that in very tight spaces, so to speak, because utilizing the structure and the architecture of the plant and the knowledge of their growth requirements. Um, so yeah, so a permaculture type of setup, you won't have to essentially reseed your plants after a while. If you have leafy greens and herbs and other things growing, you're going to recognize, okay, I'm going to harvest from this section, that section over there, I'm going to allow it to go to seed and just wild sprout. And what you will find that as the seasons go on, as you expand your garden, you're making sure you're capturing water, you're harvesting energy from the sun in the form of compost that's now amending your soil. You have your plants arranged where certain plants are beneficial to one another. They enhance each other's growing condition, and so you have that knowledge, and so you plant companion plants together. There are certain plants you'll have in your garden in this permaculture or this ecological farm that you will not harvest from. One, you're going to plant some things that, you know what, the pests really like that. So whether that's some wild callaloo or some other type of spinach or leafy green, that you have a section that, you know what, I'm going to plant those over there and I'm going to allow them to eat that, right? Because they're going to be a part of this ecosystem too. But in addition to that, I'm also going to attract those beneficial insects that are going to eat those pests. So some of those beneficial insects are your ladybugs and your wasps. Those aphids and whatnot that love to eat the new green parts of your plant. The wasps and the baby ladybugs, they devour them. They're like one of your best lines of defense. And just having a robust diversity of insects will help. So there will be those that would love to feed on your plants, and yeah, you will sacrifice some leaves and some plants, but the beneficial insects, once you're encouraging their growth or their habitat, you leave wildflowers growing along your perimeter of your farm, and that will just keep the insect life bubbling.
So it's safe to say biodiversity is key.
Biodiversity is key. I mean, even earthworms, right? You know, um, the composting with earthworms, adding earthworms to your soil. Once again, that's a consistent cycle, a nutrient cycle you're promoting by having earthworms in your soil. So you'll get to the point where, you know what, I actually don't need to compost so much, because as this leaf dries and dies and falls into the soil and gets integrated, because the chicken has come through and scratched it into the soil, then those earthworms that are there, they're going to grab onto that, they're going to chew that up and turn that into worm castings, and my soil is being fertilized for me. And so that's the idea,
Now,
generally.
one of the things that made me want to do this topic, well, besides the fact that I wanted you to be my first guest, I noticed over the lockdown, a lot of people turned into these mini farmers. I've been seeing posts where people are now planting their own herbs in their windowsill. They're creating pallet gardens, cement blocks, and things like that to create this space. And I felt like a lot of people would benefit from this just basic, simple advice. And so, in your opinion, what are some of the best things to plant and have that? I think you called it co. What was the word? What was the term you said again? Co-farm.
You mean
Like with the whole
companion plant?
thing, like what plants grow well together, what are ideal for behemoths to grow, and like specifically for right now, like what are some of the things that are good to plant right now?
Yep. So let's start with, okay, the name of the series. What's the name of our series? Siren Sundays, right? Being
Sunday.
And we're being hosted by the Sustainable Lifestyle. Is that the name?
Sustainable.
Yeah. So it's a lifestyle, right? So once you've decided, okay, I am going to grow something I will take care of and then eventually eat, right? That's a lifestyle. And so whether you are a home grower with a small herb box in your window, or you're a full-fledged new farmer that you've had 10 acres sitting there doing nothing, and now you're kind of getting into it. Um, it's a lifestyle, right? So it's all about knowing what you're growing and why you're growing it. So, for example, if I am living in a little apartment building and I don't have much yard space, I can't expect to grow pumpkins and sweet potatoes and a whole bunch of bananas and plantains and things like that. You have to know the space that you're working with, right? Um, and why are you growing it? Are you growing to provide yourself with just this one thing that you really like to eat? Or is your objective to never go to the supermarket again? And so that's the idea, right? Know why you're growing. If you're growing just to have, you know what, I really like fresh basil when I make my pasta, so I'm just gonna grow basil. Then then you know why you're growing. But if you're like, you know, I don't want to go to the supermarket for 6 weeks because I can grow, I can walk in my yard and I can harvest tomatoes and harvest my peppers and things like that, then that's your objective. Once you know why you're growing, then you can go to how will you grow and what will you grow. So one thing we would have told people back when we were doing our backyard farming was, you know, make a list of your kitchen vegetables. Make a list of what's in your fridge right now, right? What are the things you like to eat? What are the things you consume on a regular basis? For most people, we just say, okay, think of what you put in coleslaw, think of what you put in your house salad, and things like that. And that's usually tomato, some form of tomato, carrot, cabbage, sweet pepper, some sort of hot pepper, and things like that. So you have your list, right? Then you have to look at, okay, what time of year is it? So right now we're in the summer. So if you want to grow anything that's leafy, you need to be sure you have it protected in some sort of control environment. So you can have it in a hoop house, in a shaded area, or inside hydroponically under lights. If you have the space and want to maximize what's good right now, peppers are growing wonderfully. You can still get some of the cherry and grape tomatoes going. Those usually have warm climate varieties. And right now in the summer, those plum tomatoes and cherry and grape tomatoes, those are awesome. You may have some issues with the larger beefsteak tomatoes, but once again, we live in a place where you can grow year round once you are adapting your growing method to the time of year. So right now, you may need to have certain, if you're growing certain tomato species that prefer cooler, the cooler months, you need to have those in a hoop house or in a greenhouse under the right temperature and humidity. If you just want to plant something outside and you know it can grow, pumpkin, watermelon, okra, those things are flourishing right now. Right? Yes, those are cool earrings, right? And those are jacaranda, right?
From the Cook Island.
Oh,
They're made
yeah, it looked like the jacaranda. Sorry, let me stick to farm. Oh yeah, that's a plumeria, right, frangipani?
Sure.
Yeah, it looks like it. Um, so yeah, it's hot now, and so you can get the hot climate cucumbers to grow, but they're going to be sensitive. You need to make sure that you're really taking care of those as well. But what you're really approaching now, if you're a traditional farmer, is you're approaching probably the last harvest, sometime in July, of a lot of your major fruiting crops. And you can plant now, but you may not get the benefit out of it if you were to wait to plant until, let's say, September. So this is the time of year where some farmers go fallow. And so essentially what they do is, instead of having your farm growing some sort of fruit bearing crop um, that's extractive and is removing large amounts of nutrients from the soil, that you're actually planting something that will add nutrients back to the soil. And so a lot of times these are nitrogen fixing plants that may be adding nitrogen back to your soil because of the depletion that's happened over the past season. And so this is a time where farmers, they take their last harvest, especially the ones of the temperature sensitive crops. Those that, you know, like the okra and some of the corn and pumpkin, those can go on into summer. But other parts of their fields that would have had some of the sensitive crops, those are essentially weeded up. Those crops are now sitting somewhere trying to compost, and they're probably reseeding with some sort of nitrogen fixer to now amend their soil. And that could be anything from peanuts to clover. Usually the legumes, the pea family, by nature, they're nitrogen fixers. And so they'll add nitrogen back to your soil. Depending on the type of farmer, they'll be going either for organic amendments or inorganic or synthetic amendments for their soil. This is the time to start to work on and get your soil ready for the next growing season. and planning is a big part of it as well. So if you knew you've grown tomatoes in this one plot for the past 2 seasons, maybe it's time to rotate. And so crop rotation is a big part of this time of year as well, where you're not having something actively growing, so you can actively plan out what will go where on your farm and how you need to amend that soil. So if you do have access to soil testing, you get your soil tested so you know that, okay, this part of my field is deficient in nitrogen and magnesium because I had a really leafy green type of product here, or magnesium or one of the other microelements because it's a heavy fruit bearing plant. And so this is the time where you're planning what's going to be put down for the next season and where that's going to go. So you're letting your land go fallow. That's what a lot of traditional farmers might be doing now. And you might see their farms just weedy and just things that are overgrown. The pumpkins are running around and the sweet potato running wild. But this is kind of that time.
So, and that, I always feel like I come up with these very curious questions because I always admit my ignorance on topics that I know nothing about. And when it comes to the Bahamas, I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eleuthera has one of the better types of soil, and it was influenced by the Sahara dust. Am I correct? Because I know the Sahara dusting, it seems to be really popular this year. But if I recall, we get that every year. I guess just this year is very thick. How does that come into play with our islands and the quality of like fertile soil across the chain of islands here?
Yep. So that red Sahara dust that is essentially provided the Bahamas in particular with um, life-sustaining nutrients and microelements, to say it like that, for centuries. We've been built on what's called these paleo salt, sorry, which is these really old layers of dirt in the ground that have lithified and turned to rock. And so mentioned Eleuthera, but other islands like Cat Island and other hilly islands, they too have accumulated a lot of this red soil. You'll find that in Eleuthera, that's where traditionally people plant their pineapples in. You go in Gregorytown, you go in Hatchet Bay, and other parts across Eleuthera, Tarpon Bay, right? And you'll find that you get these pockets of rich red soil. Um, if you go to the Levy Preserve, you go to the edible history section at the back, you can see that soil there is an example of um, this red lateritic soil, and it said that it's iron rich, but it also contains other elements in it as well that one provide the basis for the nutrients and nutrient availability in our soils, but also provides food for our coral reefs. So the same way those organics, and yeah, we can talk about the reef, right? The forests of the sea, right? So that red soil is feeding our reefs as well, and it's an integral part of our the bigger picture, which is that the world is this interconnected living organism, right? And yes, everyone may be paying attention to the dust storm as far as, oh yeah, it's going to help suppress hurricanes, or oh, and I have to worry for my allergies. Looking at that, but at a very simple, basic level, that is the planet feeding itself and nourishing itself, and a part of those cycles where the same way our ocean currents carry minerals and carry other things, carry our conch, carry our ocean resources elsewhere around the world, right? So we're this living organism. So that's one example of that. But yes, that red dirt, if you go to Eleuthera, near to the glass window bridge, you can see in those cliff faces where the rock is fractured, you can see the lines. You can see the what do you call it? The stratigraphy. You can see those horizontal lines in the rock, right? That shows that red layer. That shows those paleosols that would have been deposited there hundreds of thousands of years ago and over again. So it just shows that how long this process has been happening. So no need to panic, right?
Right. Thanks for that because I know a few people messaged me and was like, "What is this Sahara dust thing?" And I'm like, "Guys, can we just calm down because it's normal." And just to touch one more point on Eleuthera, this is more of, I guess, a personal question that hopefully benefits other people. I know that we have this thing here called the pineapple season. And if anybody knows me well, they know I'm obsessed with the Lutheran pineapples. FYI, anyone watching, if you feel like gifting me one, I am here and I am ready. I always wondered why we are only getting pineapples once a year. Like, is it because it takes so long to grow, so farmers only want to invest the energy to get it one time a year, or is it because that's the only ideal time to really get these pineapples from this Eleutheran soil? Oh, and Long Island, I think, also
Um,
supplies.
yeah, and you got Long Island, Cat Island. They have their pineapple there too. I've seen some in Andres. And so pineapple is one of those plants that if you from slip, which is the little mini uh, sucker that's gonna pop off on the side, or you chop off the top of your pineapple when you receive it. Usually it's about an 18-month process to get to fruit. So that's a year and a half. Um, Now, in that process, in terms of when uh, those pineapples will fruit, so each plant has its own internal biological clock, and especially for fruiting and flowering, there's essentially plants recognize the change in one angle of the sun and the intensity of the sun, the hours of direct sunlight it's getting, and what and the spectrum of which part of the light spectrum is being exposed to, and all of those things provide signals to these plants for their different growth stages. I am not a pineapple farmer, um, but around this time of year, where we're receiving more sunlight, direct sunlight than in the winter months, that essentially I would say that, and to go back to pineapples are they are heavy feeders, right? So a part of this too is that farmers are fertilizing their plants accordingly, because you want your plants essentially to be robust into a certain size before you quote unquote allow them to go to fruit. And so you can probably get your pineapples to fruit early or at some other point of the year by adding a different ratio of fertilizer to signal the fruiting process and the flowering process. The farmers, they would know that if I were to plant this pineapple here and just let it go naturally, it's going to take 18 months and it's going to fruit in the summertime. So if you're working with your plant's natural biological cycle, and maybe some other pineapple farmer can come on and we can talk about pineapple. We can have pineapple Sunday, right? Right? Because I think it's a great topic. They would probably know that I'm supporting vegetative growth for the next year and a half. I'm getting these plants as big and robust because the bigger the stock plant I have when it's time for a fruit, that's going to support this fruit set, and I'm going to get a nice juicy fruit that's going to be pest free and disease resistant and all these things. So like I said, you probably could get it to fruit at a different time of the year, but your fruit may not set properly. The flower may never go to fruit. It's also about all these conditions tied into one. I can't say right now who the main pollinators would be for the pineapple, or if they require pollination. I can't remember right now if they self-fertilize, but that may also be a part of it as well. That it's a time of year when their flowering coincides with what's happening in the environment, but also which pollinators are present and facilitating that process. And I feel like they require pollination, even though some pineapple do produce seed, if you look. And so anyway, we need to have a pineapple talk. We need to have pineapple. Any of y'all ever cut pineapple open and see the seed along the skin? You know that's a really lutra pineapple. This ain't no dual imported nothing. Look out for the seed.
Oh, okay. And that would be fun. I think post COVID, when the world comes down, it'd be good to do these kind of things where we're gonna cut open the different fruits, because I know, just to throw in another fun fruit fact that I know because it's very limited, the fact that I feel like I'm gonna mess this up. The strawberry is no, is it strawberry an aggregate fruit? But it's different. What is like? It's a fun fact about strawberry that like it slips me now. It's escaping me. Or is it the tomato? It's the tomato. It's not a fruit. It's a vegetable. What am I saying?
Well, essentially, the tomatoes essentially people would say it's a vegetable, but the tomato itself is a fruit, right? The same way the eggplant is a fruit, or that a pepper is a fruit. It is the fruit of the plant, and technically, a vegetable from a botanical perspective and anatomy perspective would be one of the vegetative parts. So the leaf, the root, the branch, right? That would be the vegetable or the vegetative part. But the fruit would be anything that goes from flower and it sets as a fruit. Now, when it comes to how we eat food, that's not how it always translates. We think of fruit as sweet and juicy, that we can make a smoothie, and that anything that's like bitter that goes into a salad is just a vegetable. But there's a line there. So like broccoli essentially is a flower. It's an immature inflorescence for the broccoli plant.
And direct relation to cauliflower? Or are they just cousins?
Yes. Well, in the same plant family, right? I think they're what, Brassica? Brassicaceae? Yeah.
And I know last thing, fruit topic. I think I've also heard bananas are not fruit, they're herbs. Is that something you've ever heard before? I'm like bringing all the fruit myths now.
Well, so yeah, that's fine. You're getting fruity, right? So the banana, it in terms of the type of plant it is a herb because it doesn't contain woody tissue, right? And so if you're looking at the description of a plant, you go back to Botany 101 and you're learning about monocots versus dicots, and you learn that one of the defining features between a monocot is that it does not have a cambial layer that will produce tissue. And so you tend to find that monocots don't have a woody layer and do not grow I don't say laterally. They don't have much lateral growth, right? Whereas a dicot would have woody tissue and have a bark and things like that. So the banana is a monocot and it's a herb, right? But it does produce a fruit, right? And that fruit, if you go back and we could want to have another talk about heirloom varieties and the traditional varieties of plants. You know, bananas typically had seeds in them and were bred for the seeds to be smaller, essentially non-existent. But if you go and find more traditional banana varieties, they have seeds in them. Some of them aren't edible, and a lot of them are really colorful. Tending for potatoes. If you want to look at potatoes, you go to Chile and South America. Potatoes come in all colors and shapes, from purple to red and orange, spotted, and there's any number. You can have a whole potato Sunday, right? Just talking about potatoes and heirloom varieties of plants. And so that brings up the discussion when people get into, okay, well, what am I going to grow? Am I going to grow a genetically modified organism, a GMO plant, or am I going to grow something that's heirloom? And you can have access to those seeds depending on where you're buying from. Seed sellers, they should give you that option depending on where you're going, where you're buying from. But those heirloom varieties would be some of those bigger beefsteak tomatoes and things like that. Wouldn't have been bred excessively. At some point, there was probably some crossing, but the heirloom varieties are those where they try to remain as true to type as possible.
You know, it's funny. You talked about tomatoes, and I had thought about this earlier. I always tell people I think that my dad has the greenest thumb ever because he'll throw things out in our yard and it'll grow. And he has these cherry that he got from the food store, and a couple of them went bad. So, of course, in throwing them out in the yard, they've grown. And this vine is producing cherry tomatoes that are like as big as my palm, same shape, but humongous to the point where I got scared when I saw the first one because I was like, why would this? I would think that because it's probably that modified, it would only these seeds would only produce these small cherry tomatoes. And is that a fluke? Is that a mutation? Like, could you shed light on that, maybe?
Well, so one of the things you find that with seeds is that there is always genetic variability, right? So you can have a plant that's wasn't bred any sort of way, that didn't have any intentional breeding to select for a particular variety. That you take say you take 100 seeds and you sow them out, and among that 100, you will find that dominant character is probably present in a majority of that progeny. But there's going to be one that stands out, or a couple of them that look a little different. Either the leaves may be larger or smaller, the stem may be thicker or thinner, the fruit set may happen at a different time. It may be sweeter. It might have a different color. So there's always genetic variation in seeds. And so when it gets down to that, where if you really want something true to type, um, guaranteed, then that's where you get into cloning. And so either you're taking a cutting of a plant, or that you're going to air layer a plant, and then, or you're going to graft something. That's how you would assure your true to type variety. But as long as you're planting the seed, there's always going to be some genetic variability. And yeah, so what is interesting now is that when you harvest that tomato that looks different than from the plant, that looks different than the parent fruit, and you take those seeds, dry them, and sow those out, and then you watch what happens with those offspring. Now, this is again an experiment now, right? This kind of like what they're teaching us about Gregor Mendel in high school with all the pea plants and selecting for the certain pea flower and crossing and all this stuff. But that's essentially, if you're interested, what you can look for. When you plant those seeds now, will I still get this same fruit, shape, and set and type? Maybe if you get 10 of them to grow, one of them will produce that same fruit type. So make sure you pick from that fruit and keep planting those seeds. And that's one way for you to select, and you can have that variety all for yourself because you picked up through your powers of observation, right?
That will be fun. And I like that Lindy kind of put out my neighborhood, but yeah, Coral Harbor being closer to the water table. I don't even know if we want to dive into that topic, but back on the bananas for 2 seconds. I feel like I've heard that you can't plant a banana seed. You have to be able to take the shoot out and put it into the ground. Is that true?
Yeah, you need to plant the sucker. Now, once again, if this is our modern edible bananas that we all have in the supermarket that um, that we're buying and eating. Some of the traditional varieties that you may still find in the wild and that are native to Asia and Southeast Asia, those would probably still have viable seeds, and some of those wild types that you can plant as an ornamental. Now, for the edible type, once again, it's my understanding that the modern banana was selectively bred to be edible and without seeds. Now, there may be an edible type out there with seeds. Once again, nature gives us all possible, all, nature provides all possibilities, right? But yes, for you to successfully transplant a banana, like what you have in the store, you need to go to the mother plant and get the sucker from the base, which is, an offshoot. Bananas, they produce suckers all the time. Um, you can just simply, if it's high enough on the tree, it's usually sturdy enough that you can just pop it off, and you just give it a day for it to dry, so that a day or so to dry, so that you're not introducing that exposed surface to your soil and to the fungi in there that may negatively impact your plant. Make sure that that layer is essentially sealed off. Or you can use like a cutlass or a knife and slice off those suckers. And with bananas, they come, they're native to areas in Asia that receive the monsoon weather, and they grow in areas with lots of water. So essentially, by rule of thumb, you can never overwater a banana, right? I'm going to say, I don't want to tell you to waste water trying to, but essentially, if you have your yard and you have a low point in your yard, you should plant bananas there. There's people who in their homes where they have their washing machine and that outlet pipe that takes the wash water out to the garden. Bananas, they'll survive near that too. They love that. They'll thrive on that. So you can never overwater a banana. And so one of the things you can do when you're planting a banana is you dig a hole that's nice and wide and deep. I would say you dig a 3 feet or more wide, because you want to make sure you're breaking up enough soil around it. So when those suckers start to form as it grows, it doesn't have, it isn't pushing through rocky soil or encountering rock that'll impede its growth. And then you go down deep enough so that it can hit the water table, quote unquote. Right? It's going to go down searching for water. But yeah, you cannot overwater bananas. That's the lesson, the take home lesson.
If I kill my daddy banana plant, I can blame you. If I go out there and just
when it's little now, I go, wait, so when it's small, give it a chance, right? It likes to drink. It's very leafy. It holds tons of water. I don't know if you've ever Yeah, if you've ever chopped down a banana tree, it holds tons of moisture. And so because bananas do not have woody tissue, the way its anatomy is designed is that it uses water to maintain its rigidity, right? And so for those leaves to stay upright and for the plant to be okay, it needs to have water. When a banana is really thirsty, you'll see the entire stalks will start to droop. The entire thing will droop, not just the leaves, because water helps it stay upright.
For whatever reason, if I get lost in Bahamian bush and I see a banana tree, I can get water from that tree.
Well, let's put it like this. I'll replace the banana with, if you're lost somewhere out in the bush and you see a sable palm, then yeah. If you see a sable palm, you know that water is relatively close to the surface. The same thing as if you're in a pine forest. If you see pine, then you know you don't need to go down more than uh, typically 1.5 to 3 feet before you hit the water table in pinelands. And so I would say look out for those. If I see a banana plant in the middle of the bush, that means somebody living nearby, and I need to go the next way.
Fair. Awesome. See, I don't know, questions in the comments, and I'm sure that we could talk to no end on this topic. So great, great for planning around septic tanks. Very
It is.
interesting.
It is. Yeah. One, it'll thrive on the excess nitrogen that may spill out of the soak away from time to time, um, and whatever moisture might accumulate there, they'll thrive. There's actually, okay, this is the last thing I talk about bananas. So there's actually you could there's a way that you can plant bananas essentially as an integrated with a composting system. And so essentially you plant a ring of bananas. Let's say you dig a big hole in the ground. Let's say you dig it about 6 to 8 feet across, 4, 5, 6 feet deep, right? Nice big wide hole. And so the mound that's around the edge, you can plant bananas in the mound, right? Along the edge. Plant them, space them maybe like 2 or 3 feet apart. You can plant them on the back side of the mound, on the top of the mound, and kind of intersperse them. However, um, we you can then use the center of that banana circle, as it's called, as a way to throw all of your composting material in there. And so this is on your farm. Essentially, you might have had a compost pit already, where you're throwing all of your used plant material and things you're weeding off of the farm into this pit that some people burn, but you should really allow to compost and break down naturally. So if you got a compost pit that was circular, that you dug into the ground along the perimeter, you plant bananas, those bananas will start to grow and thrive. They're going to feed into all that nice organic compost that's growing in the center. Keep it cool, and essentially your bananas are just going to flourish, and it's a perpetual feeding system for them. And you should try it out. You should Google it. Banana circle. Put your compost pit in the middle. I've
Definitely.
seen where people have made outdoor showers using bananas in a similar manner, where essentially you take a ring of bananas and plant them at varying heights, and they space them out appropriately. And once they're in full growth, they're adults, they essentially provide a screen that's impenetrable. Some people now, they plant bananas along fences for privacy, as privacy screens. And so it's essentially taking that idea of using bananas for privacy. Yeah, it's kind of like a keyhole garden, right? So you essentially plant the perimeter of your outdoor shower with bananas, and you put your spigot there. And every time you shower, your bananas will love you because they love water.
They like to drink.
Yes.
That is actually, that's really informative. That was good. And yeah, a keyhole garden. I don't know what that is. Can you just quickly say what that is? Is that just a similar
Yeah.
concept?
Yeah, do I have a key nearby? So essentially, it's if you were to the simplest of I say the simplest of one of the simple ways to design a garden is, or when you're designing a garden is, you have to think about how you're going to move around your space. So if I think of a keyhole that has a kind of like a slender path and then kind of a rounded top where um, the wider part of the key will fit. If you think of this, and there's two ways you can think about it. You can think of a keyhole garden, and this is now your walking path. This is the shape of your walking path. And so along the perimeter, you have your plants growing. So essentially you can access all of your crops through this path and through the circular access in the middle, right? And so kind of like a keyhole garden, she's saying for a keyhole garden, you put your plants along the perimeter of your pathway, and as you're walking along, you have access, and usually you give it like 3 feet. That's usually, you don't want to bend over too much. 4 feet, then you probably have to access it from both sides. But 3 feet is usually good enough for you to stand or kneel there and reach in and harvest and do whatever garden maintenance you need. But yes, kind of like a keyhole garden.
So planning is definitely very important for gardening because, as you said that in my mind, I thought, I would definitely be that one person to start a garden, and the middle would have fruits, and I'd be like, no, and I got to trample through my garden to get to this fruit. So great tip. And again, I don't really see any questions. Thank you guys for all these comments. I don't want to keep you, Mark, because I'm probably going to want you back on other shows. But just like an end thought, um, if you had to say, and you can choose not to, I almost kind of feel like what you will say. If you had to say what the best island in the Bahamas is for planting or for plants, whether it be elevation, water table, its proximity to other islands, different things. I know Inagua gets that salty air, so they have that bonsai forest thing going on. So I don't know if you pick Inagua, but what island is the best island to farm on or to plant on?
That's a baited question. You're gonna cause me to get in trouble with that. I would say islands where there is a good freshwater lens. That would be the primary. I would look for those islands primarily because once you have access to fresh water, that that solves a good portion of your problems. Now, and those, as we say, are the Pine Islands. So that's Grand Bahama, Abaco, Andros, New Providence. That would have a readily available supply of fresh water in the freshwater land. Now, we're not getting into the threats to our freshwater lands and blah, blah, blah. We're just saying those with more available freshwater by makes sense that would be more amenable to farming. Other islands also have fresh water. You just have to know where to find it and how to site your farm appropriately. Apart from that, across most of our islands, if not all of our islands, our soils are relatively thin, generally, and alkaline. And so, because we're limestone based, for the most part, our soils are alkaline, and the pH of your soil is a major factor on the nutrition and nutrient availability for your plants. And so, if your soil is too alkaline, you may have added all of the nitrogen, all of the other elements that your plants need, but because the pH isn't right, it cannot assimilate those nutrients into its root structure just because of the chemistry that's going on in the soil. So soil is really the limiting factor when it comes to where you're going to grow in the Bahamas. And so for any farmer, they need to consider how they are going to amend their soil, and how they're going to continue to amend it throughout their growing life. And so growing on an elevated area versus a flat land, those come with different considerations. But let's say, for example, on some of the Atlantic-facing islands, so Cat Island, Long Island, Eleuthera, there has the prominent ridge system that has these very high dunes and this kind of rolling hill system. You tend to find that in the valleys between hills that you find some of that good dirt, that good red soil as accumulated, right? And so for those particular islands, you may find it's better to grow down in the valley, one, because it's closer to the water table and you'll be able to hit that more readily if you needed to dig in. And two, this is where maybe a lot of the nutrients have kind of washed in. If you're in Andros and you don't have the hills, but what you do have in Andros are lots of little sinkholes and small mud-filled kind of karst features. And so you have parts of Andros, particularly in the south, where in the forest is essentially littered with holes that are about, let's call it 10, 15, 20 feet across, maybe 5, 6, 7 feet deep, and the bottom is just strictly saturated mud and soil. And it doesn't always have standing water, but these are areas that stay wet. And in those areas, you can plant crops, and essentially, you don't need to water them. And so it's all about knowing your land and knowing your space and having a good idea of the sense of place of where you're growing and using your powers of observation.
And that was quote from Grover, right?
Super Grover. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has truly been such a great talk. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. And I'm going to try to incorporate an exit sentence, which is remember, in the Bahamas, we are not separated by water, we are connected by it. Have a great Sunday,
Yay.
everyone. Thanks again, Mark.
Thanks.